moving forward, it seems that Kirby Smart has obviously many concerns about college football, as a lot of people do. He's got one that he talked about recently on Josh Pate, and this is actually something that is an advantage for the Georgia Bulldogs. And so rightfully so does Kirby Smart, does the Georgia staff have to be concerned about this, and it's depth. Depth across a lot of positions, being able to have 3, 4, 5 guys that can get out there and do what you need to do your job, get the job done. I think that there will be, quote, maybe a lack of depth is not the best way to put it, but I don't think that that's going to be as easy to attain moving forward. Being able to, look at a quarterback position and say, hey, we got 3 guys that we feel real comfortable can go out there and win us these ball games. At running back, hey, we got these 4 guys that we think we can rope in there, give 20 touches in a game, and they would be fine, and that'd be fine that they're our lead workhorse back. Being able to say that is going to go away a little bit more and a little bit more if the changes that have happened in college football continue at this rate. And it's the combination of the transfer portal and NIL. And look, I'll make a point that I think I made a few weeks ago. Dean, Matt, and I haven't really recorded a lot of joint videos the last couple weeks, but I think the last time that we did, we talked about NIL. And my point there is, the biggest problem is the combination of the two, of the transfer portal and NIL, and I think that it's caused kind of a free agency market type of deal that we just haven't seen in college athletics, and to an extent, it's just not right in a way. That at least it doesn't feel right. Now, it's a different conversation, but it's part of what's causing the depth problems, right? Or what's about to cause it, because if a team is built on the transfer portal, then they're probably not going to have a lot of depth. And if teams are getting gutted by the transfer portal and, hey, this is actually what's preventing your team from having depth, I think that it's tied to that concept and people being able to just leave. And moving forward, is that going to be a problem for Kirby and Georgia? We need to examine that. I'm going to read a little excerpt from what he had to say the other day in terms of being concerned about depth. I want to go through and give a couple of examples of the last few years. There are examples from last season where depth was an issue, and we'll hit the hammer on that. And there are examples where depth was a really, really good thing for Georgia. And so it's huge. It's one of the biggest advantages that the Dogs have. Not a lot of teams have had the depth that Georgia's had, and they use that depth on a weekly basis. All right, I got to find another word for depth, for having a bench, for having more than just a first string that you trust to go out there and perform. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post here. Am I the third string Dawg Poster? Is that the deal? Make sure you're checking out our newsletter down below. You don't want to miss out on it. Obviously, not a lot is going on at the moment. That's going to change in a week here. Right? We'll get to hear from Kirby in an official capacity, and we should be hearing from him on a regular basis. Make sure you're tuning in to this channel. Make sure you're going to dawgpost.com over the next month and a half, and every day, I'd be selling you guys short. But spring practice is about to get going. And so we'll have a lot of content there. I'll have a lot of content on the site. I'll have a lot of firsthand reporting to do on here as well for you guys. So make sure you're keeping up with everything. And thank you for watching. Thank you for being signed up for the newsletter. I'm going to move on to Kirby's quote. And let's start with that. I've got it pulled up on my phone. Kirby Smart, here we go, is about what he is concerned ahead of spring practice. Depth in all positions. Can we create offense and defensive line depth? I look across football. The game is changing. Less big guys are playing. Every NFL scout comes in here and says, we can't find any offensive linemen. Well, that's what we do here. We recruit offensive linemen. We get big guys and we develop people. We develop defensive linemen. There's just less of them and there's just less big people. So we want to establish depth at both of those positions. They definitely do that across both of those positions. I want to talk about the defensive line a little bit next year. Let's go ahead and hit it right on the hammer. The offensive line is one of Georgia's biggest advantages, and it is because of depth. Not telling any secrets here, but what does Georgia do that's extremely uncommon across sports? Definitely across professional football, but something that's extremely uncommon from what I've noticed, the way that they rotate the offensive line, and it's because they've had injuries on the offensive line as well. It's been a little bit extra, but what I don't want people to lose track of is the fact that even if these guys aren't getting hurt, even if Xavier Truss doesn't, get injured against Vanderbilt, even if Amarius Mims doesn't tweak his ankle and have to have surgery because of what happened in the South Carolina game, they would still have been rotating guys on the offensive line. At guard, they had 4 guys that they wanted to play at guard last year, and they played them, right? Xavier Truss, he obviously played some tackle as well. Tate Ratledge, starter. Truss was a starter, and then they moved him out, and it's yet to be seen where Xavier Truss's spot is on this offensive line, and honestly, who the starting 5 across the offensive line is going to be. I still am not 100% sure just because of how much rotating they did. Dylan Fairchild eventually kind of wins that left guard job, essentially, right? He's the starter. Once Amarius Mims got hurt, they moved over Xavier Truss to right tackle because he's been cross-trained for so long and they know that he could play more than one position on the offensive line. They felt comfortable putting a guy like Dylan Fairchild in it. Well, guess what? Dylan Fairchild didn't just play the whole game. Micah Morris got reps, right? And they rotated Micah Morris in there. And they discovered, hey, and if they didn't already know, then they did find out, hey, we can trust Micah Morris to be out there too. All of a sudden, they've got all sorts of guards that can be out there and play. How does that benefit? Fresh legs. There are several benefits. Having fresh legs, especially on your offensive line. Those are big guys. They're getting tired, right? So you can rotate like that. The defensive line is getting more tired. Obviously, a really good defensive line rotates, and we'll get to that. But fresh legs, experience, right? You're developing experience that other teams don't have, right? As far as on their bench. Being able to play other guys gives more people the ability to play, which leads into the third thing, and that causes you to be able to trust more players to win in crunch time because they've been out there in crunch time and they've been out there playing significant snaps. Those are the things that can go away if you have the transfer portal on NIL and people just leave and they don't wait their turn, or they, maybe the situation wasn't as green as they thought it was going to be. So, hey, I'm going to take off and I'm going to go somewhere else. And look, to an extent, that's okay. And it always should have been okay for that to happen. And it kind of, to me, it's not okay that wasn't okay originally. Now, it's just kind of out of control to a little bit of an extent. It's just out of control. And obviously, there are things that people don't like. People don't like those big dollar figures. I'd like to go back to when we were, everyone was cheating a little bit and everyone just didn't really care, right? Maybe those days were a little bit simpler when people were breaking the rules and everyone was breaking the rules and it just wasn't as drastic. But on the offensive line, you get that depth defensive line. So let's go back to 2021 real quick, and then I'll jump back to 2023 and a depth problem that Georgia had. And it wasn't because of the transfer portal NIL, but it is something that can cause that. So if you recruit at the level that Georgia does, you can create defenses like they did in 2021. Obviously, there's some coaching and there's development and there's program culture that goes into what happened in 2021. But if you recruit and get all the guys like they did, you can have depth. I mean, oh my gosh, the way that they rotated on that defensive line in 2021 was ridiculous. That doesn't exist. I don't think you'll ever see a defense that talented again because people aren't going to wait their turn for that long. Jordan Davis was a senior that he had been playing for a couple of years. Devontae Wyatt, playing a little bit in Jordan Davis's shadow. You got a Jalen Carter there who's at that point, he's a sophomore. Hey, I'm not going to be the starter my sophomore year. And people already thought Jalen Carter is some sort of diva. So, Jalen Carter chose to be there as a sophomore. He didn't have to, right? So that's kind of my point there. It may go away a little bit more, right? The more that we get into this, the more that people, and this is no knock on Jamon Dumas-Johnson, Darius Smith, but they would have created insane depth for Georgia this past year. They would have made it to where Georgia's, I think the outside linebacker position is one that they're thin on, and they lost 2 of them in the transfer portal. Inside linebacker, I think that they're fine, but imagine if they still had Jamon Dumas-Johnson and how they could just rotate the entire game, and they might still be able to do that because of where Georgia is at as a program. But that's what could happen. And let's go back. This is not necessarily an NIL example, but you want to have the guys. And at running back, there were times where they just didn't have the guys. Now, Cash Jones is a good football player. Roderick Robinson is a good football player. Andrew Paul, I'm sure he's a good football player. They weren't ready. They weren't starting guys. They weren't like legit rotational backs. Maybe they could become that. But at the point in time last year, they weren't. And they were forced to play a lot in September and some in October because Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton weren't healthy. And that wouldn't have been a problem if injuries is really what hurt the running back room. But if a running back or two decides to transfer and all of a sudden you're grasping for straws after the spring because you can't transfer after the spring and that just be wrong, then you would run into another depth problem back there. But they shouldn't be putting, if George is putting a guy like Dylan Bell in the backfield, obviously part of it is because of his versatility, but you should never run into that problem. And at Georgia, that is one of its biggest advantages is the depth. And I feel like I laid that out well enough for it to be understood. And I think maybe it was an easy thing to understand anyway. Future problem? Question mark? Link is down below for the newsletter. Appreciate you guys watching.